Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Bill Brant, and this is BSing Sports. This is our first of hopefully many podcasts where we sit around and we talk sports. Ryan and I are going to start with mostly Philadelphia sports on this podcast, but in the future and even in this podcast, we're going to transition into sports in general. But we're more passionate about Philly sports as we were raised in that area. Having said that, I also want to express how excited Ryan and I are to finally get this podcast going. We've been talking about it for years, and we're just gonna get into it. Ryan, Philadelphia Eagles elephant in the room. Carson Wentz traded to the Colts.
So the details of this trade are as follows. The Eagles do get a 2021 third-round pick, which will give them 10 draft picks in this upcoming draft next month, and a conditional 2022 second-round pick that becomes a first if Wentz plays 75% of the snaps or 70% of the snaps and the Colts make the playoffs. The Colts made the playoffs last year with a worse quarterback. They have a really good young nucleus. They're a really good team. They're really well coached. Frank Reich's down there. Philly fans know that. And Wentz has only played under 70% of the snaps once in his career. So nothing's guaranteed in sports. This should be a first-round pick, barring something catastrophic.
Yeah, I 100% agree with you. We've discussed it over and over. This is a guy who 3 years, he threw 7 interceptions. 3 seasons, he threw 7 interceptions. Granted, he had a bad 2020, but there were a lot of pieces around him that just were falling apart and weren't going well for the team in general. I mean, look at the Super Bowl with Patrick Mahomes and how when your offensive line doesn't block, there's not much you can do. So again, he had a bad season in 2020. However, again, 3 seasons, only 21 interceptions. Yeah, you got to look at that as a whole. And if I were a Colts fan, I'd be super excited to have him in the building. Now, there was some feedback from the fan base, Philadelphia fan base, about how Howie Roseman didn't get enough for Carson Wentz, and I disagree with that. How do you feel?
My initial reaction when I first heard the news was I walked into my closet, pulled out my old Marvin Harrison jersey that I've had for about 12 years, and switched fandom. But after sleeping on it for a few nights now, I realized that was probably the best Howie was going to do. Given the way that the media smeared Carson Wentz a little bit, the media drives the appearance of everybody and everything, especially in the sports world. They painted him as a bad teammate. They painted him as a guy who was lazy and uncoachable. They said so many negative things about him. And that, given his injury history, you don't want to commit a first-round pick to a guy that could potentially be a bad teammate or injury prone. So I think Howie Roseman did a good job possibly getting a first-round pick. Like I said earlier, nothing's guaranteed, but there's high chances. And he had former teammates who were great presences in the locker room too, like Malcolm Jenkins and Chris Long, come to his defense and say, what the media is saying is not entirely true. He wasn't held the most accountable, but he was definitely a better teammate than the media made him out to be.
Yeah, they come out and said that he wasn't a cancer in the locker room by any means necessary. Having said that, with I mean, you already mentioned touch base on it, but there's no precedent for what you can get for a franchise quarterback in the trade market. So I agree with you. Howie got what he was going to get for him, especially based on what the media was doing to Carson at the time. Now we're moving on from Carson Wentz. The Eagles are moving on from Carson Wentz. Jalen Hurts is the number one. How do you feel about him? How about going forward with him?
4.5 games is hard to judge, but I was impressed with some of the things he did, especially as a rookie coming into the situation he was in. You know, the team was kind of in shambles. There were questions about the coaching staff, questions about the locker room, and I think he did all right. Given all the circumstances, I don't think he played poorly. There are definitely some things he's going to need to clean up, like his accuracy. 52% completion rate is not going to cut it, even as a backup in the NFL. The 6 fumbles, you know, he's a primary runner, so fumbling happens. He's got to clean that up too. 4 interceptions, again, it happens. He's a young quarterback. He's got to clean some of these mistakes up. You can't expect perfection, especially from a guy who played 4.5 games. So jury's still out for sure on Jalen Hurts. My only issue is you better be right about him because Carson Wentz was a one-time MVP candidate.
Yes, I agree. If all of a sudden Carson Wentz and Patrick Mahomes is the new Brady Manning, there's definitely an issue there. So when they decided to trade Carson Wentz, my confidence in Hurts also was kind of in the verdict is still out. We need, like you said, 4.5 games just isn't enough. But hopefully he does well. You know, he rushed for 500 yards in that span. Again, we know he's got good legs, but we're going to need to see more out of him in year 2, especially. Moving on from Philadelphia sport talk in the NFL, we're going to go to overall NFL news here. Brady doing Brady things over here in Tampa. Signs through 2022 in an attempt to save cap space, keep the team together. Something that Brady has done his entire career. He did it in New England several times to keep pieces around him. How do you feel about this one?
Three things guaranteed in life: death, taxes, and Tom Brady. This guy, he's never going to retire. But in all honesty, he did a team first move, and everybody, points at cheating or whatever they want to say as to why he's been so successful. This guy, he's a team player. I don't know that he's ever taken more than $25 million a year. Compared to other quarterbacks, he definitely deserves more. But he wants to save money. He wants to keep teams around him. He wants to keep chemistry in the locker room, and he wants to win football games. And that's exactly what he's done in his career. I mean, he has more Super Bowl wins than any other team in NFL history. So obviously, he's doing something right.
Yeah, I 100% agree with you. And like I said at the top of it, it's just Brady doing Brady things. Now, I'm not 100% on the whole analytics of the contract situation. He added 4 years to his contract, but is signed through 2022, so I don't really know how that's supposed to have worked. But they saved $19 million in cap space, which is huge in the NFL. $19 million in cap space.
Yeah, the $19 million is going to go a long way, especially because they just franchise tagged Chris Godwin. I think, and correct me in the comments if I'm wrong, but he signed 3 dummy years to the end of his contract. And that basically just means that his cap hit is spread out over those 3 extra years. So that way it saves the team $19 million next year. Correct me if I'm wrong, if anybody knows the situation more, but that's the way that I see it and the way it was explained to me and the way that I interpret the information. So
that's also how I interpreted the information. Another quarterback who got a contract restructure / deal. Dak Prescott signs 4 years, $160 million with the Cowboys, $126 guaranteed. My first impressions on this are that leg injury was gruesome, and he was not necessarily a super mobile quarterback, but he relied on his legs a lot. That's a lot of money for a guy who you don't know how he's going to return. How'd you feel about that one? And also, what does it do for the quarterback market at this point?
The quarterback market, as we know, has been increasing the last couple of years. I mean, Patrick Mahomes last year signed the record deal, but to me, the timing of the deal is more interesting than anything. The NFL salary cap for the 2021 season hadn't officially been released yet. So this tells me that Jerry Jones was definitely committed to Dak Prescott. And also, I wouldn't be surprised if some big names don't come back to the Cowboys to save money. 2 names off the top of my head are Ezekiel Elliott and Michael Gallup. Zeke's got a good backup. Tony Pollard played really well in his absence last year, and Michael Gallup is kind of the odd man out in that 3-headed receiver rotation. Amari Cooper signed a big deal. CeeDee Lamb's explosive. He's cheap because he's still on his rookie deal. So Michael Gallup, to me, seems like the odd man out.
Yeah, I agree with you. Gallup does seem like the odd man out. He's not as explosive as CeeDee Lamb. He is fast, but he's not as explosive as CeeDee Lamb. And as you already pointed out, they just signed Amari Cooper to a pretty big contract. And as you also mentioned, Pollard played great in Zeke's absence. And even when Zeke was on the field, he wasn't as impressive as he was his first 3 seasons. So I don't know how they would work moving Zeke if that's the option that they're trying to take. But if he's still on the team and all 5 of those guys are still on the team at any given point in time, they're going to have a hard time signing those offensive linemen that they need, the defensive linemen that they need, the linebackers that are really good. You got Leighton Vander Esch, who still hasn't been signed, stuff like that. So Dallas may have handcuffed themselves a little bit here, but I mean, my biggest takeaway from it was, again, $126 million guaranteed on a leg that you don't know even works anymore. Having said that, Dak Prescott career stats, he's got 66% completion percentage, 106 to 40 touchdown interception ratio, almost a 98 passer rating. I mean, he's a better than serviceable quarterback. He can manage the team. It's just that leg injury was really gruesome. I didn't like seeing it. Nobody likes seeing it. So that's just a lot of guaranteed money. A little bit of other news around the NFL. J.J. Watt's at the Cardinals.
Yeah, 2 years, $31 million. There's a lot of good pass rushers in the NFC West. You got Aaron Donald, you've got J.J. Watt now. I mean, the defensive lines in the NFC West are just stacked, and you got to stack good defensive lines when you have 4 really good quarterbacks out there. Matt Stafford, Russell Wilson, Kyler Murray. I mean, the list. There's just so much talent in the NFC West now, and it's, in my opinion, by far the best division in the NFL.
I would agree with you. The West is definitely the best division in the NFL. I also think J.J. Watt chose a good spot for him as an individual. You know, they got guys like Larry Fitzgerald in that organization that are just like class acts, and J.J. Watt has been a class act his entire career. I love what he did at the end of the last game this past season, where he ran over to Deshaun Watson and and like apologized for the way the season went and apologized for wasting one of Watson's years in the NFL. And that just goes to show the kind of person that JJ Watt is. Like he really, really feels for everybody he plays with. I also think he may have wanted to go to a team that was possibly a playoff contender and maybe help them get over the edge. You know what I'm saying? So I and the Cardinals aren't a bad team. They've got good pieces. You know, they've got Kyler Murray, who's still growing as a player, not necessarily as a person. But again, he's got talent. He uses his legs really well. He does have a strong arm. There's a reason he was starting over Jalen Hurts at Oklahoma. So they have pieces down there in Arizona, and I think JJ Watt chose a good spot.
Yeah, for those of you that don't understand that joke, Kyler Murray's about my height, which is about 5'9", 5'10", which is really short for an NFL quarterback.
Really short, yes. Mark Ingram signs with the Texans for 1 year, $3 million. I don't know about interesting, but they've got a lot of problems there. The Texans do. How do you feel about the signing of Mark Ingram?
They signed the wrong type of back. They need to start looking at quarterback.
Yes.
I think that was quite a desperate move to maybe try and retain Deshaun Watson. I don't know, but you know they're obviously at opposite ends of the spectrum when it comes to how the organizations run. Deshaun Watson in the front office. I think they need to start looking at a Ryan Fitzpatrick type, a veteran guy who can come in and he can win ball games. I mean, we saw it with Miami last year, you know. And Fitzpatrick's at the end of his career. He's not going to want to take a backup spot. He's going to want to start somewhere. The Texans seem perfect for him.
Yeah, I agree with you, especially if Watson decides he's not coming back to camp, which is still very much on the table. So I agree with you. The Ryan Fitzpatrick situation there, that actually is a team that would probably suit him. He got kind of a raw deal last year in Miami with, he had the Dolphins rolling, and then they decided to pull him and put Tua Tagovailoa in. And again, I said this last night, but I know he needs to grow and he's going to be your franchise quarterback, and he needs the opportunity to play and show you what they have. However, you had the Brady-less Patriots in the division and only the Bills to keep pace with, and you were keeping pace with them, and you pulled the starting quarterback. Now, I'm not saying that inevitably doomed the Dolphins, but I am saying that overall Ryan Fitzpatrick had been playing better than Tua. There was 2 games where he came in at halftime for Tua and won the game. So I think he just got a little bit of a raw deal there in Miami.
Yeah, and I can't see him going back to the Dolphins. But moving on, baseball. Let's talk Phillies for a second. Bill, the Phillies made a lot of offseason moves. Why don't you tell us about a few of them?
They got a couple of new pitching acquisitions, but I think the biggest acquisition that they did was by bringing in Dave Dombrowski to head operations, and he brought in an analytics guy in Sam Fold to be the GM. Now, Dave's old school approach. First of all, Dave is a proven winner. You're going to touch base on this a little bit more than I am. He's a proven winner. He's won World Series. He's been in organizations that have just won games. I think that's phenomenal to get back in the front office. And the fact that they brought Sam Fold in, who's more of an analytic guy, I think really bodes well for the Phillies. It certainly couldn't have gotten worse than the last couple of years. How do you feel about Dave?
I love the acquisition. Like you said, he's an old school guy, and Sam Fold, has come up through the ranks as an analytics dude. So I think the mix of the two would be perfect. Maybe Sam can learn a thing or two from Dave. And Dave's been all around the league. He's been on teams that have won World Series. He's been on rebuilding teams. So he has an idea of how this is going to go. He has an idea of how to put the Phillies in the right direction. And I think he made a lot of, not necessarily big name moves outside of, signing Archie Bradley. They brought back Gregorius. They brought back Romuto. You'll get a little bit more into that. But it's something different. The Phillies bullpen was an atrocity last year. They were the worst in MLB history. So even just bringing in something different, it can't hurt.
Yeah. I 100% agree. Bringing something in different is what we needed at this point. A couple of other minor Phillies news. Well, I guess it's not really minor. We got a couple of big ones here. Harper entered camp healthy. We know he had a sore back at the end of the season last year. He started super hot last year and then hurt his back, which is super unfortunate. He was very much in the MVP talks until he hurt his back. Hoskins has been playing, which is extremely fortunate, for the Phillies and their starting first baseman. He tore his UCL trying to catch an errant throw from Romuto. Corey Dickerson, an ex-Philly, actually ran into him. And then I think the biggest news out of Philly camp the last couple of days is that JT Romuto, who broke his thumb in practice on February 17th is almost a full go in practice right now. He's doing baseball activities. The cast is off. Why don't you talk about JT for a minute?
Yeah, I mean, best catcher in baseball. The title's been there for a couple of years now. We brought him over from Miami. Big guy in that trade was Sixto Sanchez. So with the way he performed, it was huge that we brought back Romuto, because if we only had him for a year and a half, giving up our top pitching prospect who was balling last year for the Marlins, that would have been a huge loss, and that would have been a bad look on the organization. So good on Dombrowski to get Romuto back. The context of the deal, 5 years, little over $100 million. Who knows how long he lasts as a catcher? This is his age 30 season. Catchers tend to age a little bit more, but I mean, JT's athletic enough. He can hold the workload. He's in great shape. He's just a super athlete. So it's possible he could catch, all 5 years. I mean, look at Yachty. He's been around for, I think 80 years now. He's still catching. So the possibility is definitely there. Or, maybe they're banking on the NL being a full-time DH by then, and Romuto gets some reps in there. But for now, he's the best catcher in baseball. This was huge, not only for the offense, but the pitching staff for him to come back.
Yeah, I 100% agree. The ability of him to help mold young pitchers is I think the biggest part of it. Like you touched on, his bat isn't the biggest part of the game. The way he catches, the way he helps the pitchers, and he calls great games. So, I mean, as you already pointed out, huge acquisition for the Phillies, or not acquisition, reacquisition for the Phillies. A couple of other things to touch on for the Phillies real quick. As a team, they really need Nola to be, third finishing Cy Young Nola from 2018. He's been a little bit off his game the last couple of years. We're really hoping he bounces back there. However, in other baseball news, and this is one that you and I have talked about in depth several times, Nolan Arenado traded from the Colorado Rockies to the St. Louis Cardinals. Go ahead, man.
Yeah, so the details of this trade, the Colorado Rockies get lefty Austin Gomber, right-handers Tony Losey and Jake Sommers, infielder Iluris Montero, and third baseman Mateo Gil. For Nolan Arenado, that's the player exchange. The Colorado Rockies also eat $50 million of the $199 million he has left on his contract, including his entire 2021 salary, which means he could go 0 for 480 for the St. Louis Cardinals, and it wouldn't matter because they didn't pay him a dime. My initial reactions to this trade is that I think the Rockies got a little hustled here, and looking back on it, yeah, Nolan Arenado had a down 2020. He had a little bit of a shoulder injury he was dealing with from the beginning of the season. It kind of affected his hitting, not so much his defense. 5-time All-Star, 4-time Silver Slugger, 8-time Gold Glove Award winner. The guy is the premier third baseman in the MLB, and they only got one top 10 prospect in Montero, and the other two guys, 19th and 22nd in the Cardinals organization. Decent guys, but not overwhelming prospects, not like a Matt Liberatore or something. So that I think the Rockies kind of got swindled a little bit, especially because they're still paying his contract too.
Yeah, my biggest thing here is if you had been able to unload his contract, maybe it wouldn't have been as big of a hit. But the $50 million that they're covering overall on this contract is just mind-boggling to me. I don't know who's in St. Louis's front office, but they deserve an award.
Yes,
and I'm not trying to bash any individual team. We're trying to get our podcast off the ground here, but the Rockies, I think they missed out here. A little bit about Gomber, who's the 8th prospect that the Rockies received. Is he's 27. He's got a 3.72 ERA and 104 MLB innings. Those aren't exactly stats that like jump at you, but he's still relatively young. You can train him, and he's a pitcher. Like you pointed out, Arenado is the premier third baseman. As Jake Muto is the catcher, Arenado is the third baseman, and it's just that simple.
He'll bounce back from his down year. Now there's questions existing on whether or not he's going to hit as well outside of Coors Field. As we know, Mile High, the ball carries a little bit more, so the power stats kind of inflated. But this isn't the first time the Cardinals have stolen a former Rocky. Larry Walker was traded to the Cardinals. He did just fine. Matt Holliday, who was a Rocky and then an A, went to the Cardinals. So they have history of business with the Rockies, and the guys that they've gotten have still done pretty well in St. Louis. So I can't expect any different from Arenado.
No, and I agree with you. I think Arenado is going to be just fine in St. Louis. A little bit more baseball news. Jackie Bradley Jr. the other day signed a deal with the Brewers, 2 years, $24 million. They have a stacked outfield in Milwaukee now. That's a stacked outfield in Milwaukee.
Yeah, especially if Lorenzo Cain starts the season healthy. I know he's been dealing with some injuries here in spring training, hasn't really played yet. But I mean, if with a full healthy lineup, you got Lorenzo Cain in center, some guy named Christian Yelich, who some of you may or may not have heard of.
No
I
one
know
knows.
he's only an MVP. And Jackie Bradley Jr. will slide into right field against right-handed pitching, and I imagine Avisail Garcia will spell him against the lefties. But that's three, guys with really above average gloves, three really above average. JBJ could be a little bit better on the bat, but still his defense absolutely makes up for it. That guy's a premier defender in the outfield.
Yeah, I 100% agree with you there. One last thing we're going to touch on for baseball fans here, and it's the one that has definitely me, I assume Ryan as well, and most people listening. They're allowing fans in the stands in the MLB. Everybody's excited about it. Andrew McCutchen came out and said there's no other environment like baseball environment when there's fans in the stands.
I wouldn't say everybody's excited about it. I'm pretty sure Houston Astros have been dreading this day for, a year and a half now. Everybody's going to show up to their games. That'll be an interesting dynamic, especially with Texas being all the way open. So I imagine they'll fill to capacity, and I can't imagine everybody in the stands is going to be cheering for them.
I actually look forward to their first game at home. I really want to see what happens there. So moving away from baseball now, we're going to go into a little bit of hockey here. We'll start with the Flyers. A couple weeks back, the Flyers had 6 players out at one time, which is huge. I know all teams are being affected by COVID right now, but the Flyers had 6, and 3 of them were pretty big names. Why don't you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, the Flyers haven't been able to get in any real rhythm this year. Very short training camp, 9 days with no preseason games, kind of threw everybody off. If you noticed in the beginning of the year, a lot of the defense was down, goals were up, communication on the back end for all teams looked really, really sloppy. But, once it was about time for the Flyers to get in rhythm, they got struck by COVID, including their captain and the longest tenured athlete in Philadelphia, Claude Giroux. That's a significant loss, especially for somebody whose number in a few years is going to hang in the rafters of the Wells Fargo Center. There's Hall of Fame discussions there. Jake Voracek, Travis Konechny, a couple other guys too. They got struck by COVID, and it hurt the team, hurt the rhythm. They were off for a week, and then they played 2 games with essentially an AHL team. They got crushed both games, and you expect that to happen.
Yeah.
But one of the most crushing things about this year has been the play of Carter Hart. Why don't you tell us about that?
Yeah, so Carter Hart isn't being helped by his defense right now. But having said that, when you look at the way Carter Hart has performed, a lot of it appears to be in his head. When you look at the stats of Brian Elliott versus Carter Hart right now, they're playing with the same people in front of him, and Elliott is just outperforming Hart on almost every facet. And Hart has struggled with that, since he was a rookie. When he gives in a goal, all of a sudden it's like a spiraling effect. We saw it last year in the playoffs. Like he was shutout dominant 3 games, and then other games he was giving 3 and 4 goals up. It's got a lot to do with his head, and hopefully they can get that squared away, because he's got the ability to be a darn good goalie in the NHL, and he's just struggling to get out of his own way right now.
I agree, and the dude's younger than me, so he has time to figure it out. He's got elite potential. It's all there. The Carey Price comparisons, who actually also had a sophomore slump. So I'm not entirely concerned for the future of Carter Hart, but for this year, I am a little bit worried. And the Flyers are fortunate that Brian Elliott is playing really well right now, so they can kind of split the workload up a little bit, allow Carter to get his head back together, get right again. And, hopefully we start playing some great hockey down the stretch, especially in front of him, because we're in fifth place in the division right now with the playoff alignment this year. That's not going to cut it. So.
Yeah, I mean, as you pointed out, we played a handful of games with an AHL team. So the 5th place setting while Boston leads the division isn't really a true stat. You got to take all that into account. It's unfortunate that they got struck with COVID, but every team is dealing with COVID, as I already pointed out. Couple of other general NHL news here. We got Binnington signing a 6-year, $36 million contract with the Blues. He was the goalie who helped them get to the Cup 2 years ago.
That's huge. Jordan Binnington's been rock solid. I know he even had a sophomore slump. He kind of came onto the scene there mid-season in 2019 and helped them win the Stanley Cup. Dude stood on his head. He played outstanding. And then he was a little bit rough around the edges his second year, first full year as a starter, similar to Carter Hart. So, and he's playing fine this year. The Blues are in great shape, and you see everybody can make a comeback. So Carter Hart, go look at Jordan Bennington. He's just fine, and he's got about 5 or 6 years on you. So you have time to figure it out, man.
I agree. Jack Eichel, once out of Buffalo. The biggest question here is, I mean, I know we've discussed why he's frustrated, and it's totally understandable. We'll touch on that in a little bit. But the biggest thing with COVID right now is, can any other team even afford his contract?
Well, it's interesting. I read an article this morning. Jack Eichel is out for the foreseeable future with an undisclosed injury. And for those of you that don't know, hockey, you do not have to disclose your injuries to the media, especially since COVID started. You don't have to say anything. You can just say the person's out with undisclosed, and that's about it. That being said, Jack Eichel is on the third year of an 8-year, $80 million deal. He is a stud player in a bad organization. And that's not to discredit the organization. They've tried. They've had a couple #1 picks in the back end in Rasmus Dahlin and Rasmus Ristolainen. They haven't exactly panned out yet, but both of them are still very young and they have time to figure it out as well. They tried to sign Jeff Skinner, who has been a healthy scratch the last few weeks, and he's making $8 million a year. So that's not going to cut it. They've tried a little bit, but the direction of the organization, Jack Eichel's just not happy with, and the Sabres seem to be struggling. So I believe he wants to go play for a contender.
Yeah, we had a discussion that Wilson's in a similar situation where they're not putting pieces around him, so he's frustrated up in Seattle for the Seahawks. I know those are two different sports, but the comparison is still there. Yeah, it's a similar comparison. You and I have joked about this a little bit, but the reality is it doesn't change. Alexander Ovechkin keeps on scoring. The biggest question that a lot of analysts are asking, and I'm going to ask you, can he catch the great one, Wayne Gretzky?
Yeah, so Ovechkin's at 1,173 games played with 714 goals. The great one, Wayne Gretzky, 1,487 games played. He has 894 goals. On a goals per game basis, Ovechkin's got actually a little bit higher of a number. Father Time does eventually get his, I guess with not with Tom Brady, or maybe not with Alex Ovechkin either. But yeah, I think it's a very realistic possibility. I mean, he just keeps scoring, and the only thing really stopping him at this point is all these COVID shortened seasons with the less games playing, the less opportunities he's going to have to score, but seems to be doing just fine.
Yeah. As long as he stays healthy, I think he's got an opportunity to catch him in goals. Points, no shot, but goals.
Yeah, goals.
So that's going to do it mostly for our Sports Talk podcast. We are going to put out a poll on our Facebook page, so please follow us at BSing Sports if you have time. We'd also like it if you could, drop any comments, stuff that you'd like us to talk about in the next podcast. But again, biggest thing is please tell your friends, like our Facebook page, follow us. We're going to be doing one of these every week. So Ryan, what's our poll question this week?
All right, so this one's an open-ended poll question, and this question probably wouldn't have come up 10 years ago, but any answer is a realistic possibility at this point. What age do you guys believe Tom Brady retires at? He's 43 right now, and signed through 2022. So he's going to play till he's at least 45, like he said he would, but he may not stop there. So what age do you guys think he calls it quits?
All right, and that's going to do it for us here at BSing Sports. Brant and Swift, have a great day.
Have a great day, guys.